How long does it take to change a cultural institution? Answer is
1,000 years.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of the Motley Stew Show. This week we're going to talk about the Supreme Court and the case that it just heard about gay marriage. Now while the oral arguments were heard this week, the answer probably won't come till about June. And when that does, that's actually going to provide likely an answer to whether or not gay couples can get married throughout the entire country. Now before we start talking about the arguments themselves, let's actually get some details on the case. Or actually it's cases. So the case before the Supreme Court is actually called Obergefell versus Hodges. And it's actually a combination of 4 different cases from 4 different states, from Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan, and Tennessee. Now this combo case is actually asking the Supreme Court to answer 2 specific questions. First, does the 14th Amendment require a state to license a marriage between 2 people of the same sex? Second, does the 14th Amendment require a state to recognize a marriage between 2 people of the same sex when their marriage was lawfully licensed and performed out of state? Now, the fact of the matter is, if the Supreme Court answers yes to the first question, the second question is pretty much moot. What I find really interesting about the second question is it pretty much seems exactly the same as the gun rights loophole of someone who actually lives in a state that has very strict gun laws, but can go out of state and buy a gun very easily and then just bring it back into his own state, as long as he didn't purchase it there. Now, leading up to cases like this, the Supreme Court actually gets a lot of things called amicus briefs. Those are otherwise known as friend of the court briefs. Now, the record holder for getting amicus briefs is actually the 2013 Obamacare case. That one got 136 amicus briefs, which was 30% higher than any case in history up to that point. But leave it to gay marriage to bring people out of the woodworks because it beat it with 148 amicus briefs. Before you go thinking that's not really that big of a deal, each of these amicus briefs runs about $25,000 to $50,000 each. And from the research from people who have actually looked into each of those briefs, the count right now is 76 for gay marriage, 58 against gay marriage, and 5 who don't really take a side. Which makes me wonder, why did they write the brief? I mean, what did they say in a brief that doesn't take a side on this? Now, while I'm going to go over a couple of the points made by each side, I'll actually provide a link down below to all 2.5 hours of oral arguments before the court. There were 90 minutes given to the first question and an hour given to the second. Now, the people arguing against gay marriage said that it's against the traditional definition of marriage and the traditional meaning of marriage, which is procreation. But they still failed to argue away the pitfall of the 70-year-old couple. That if a 70-year-old couple got married, you know that they're not going to have kids, so should they not be allowed to marry even though they're a heterosexual couple? So right there, it pretty much pulls the rug out from under the idea that marriage has to be about procreation. Because if it is, there's a lot of weddings and a lot of marriages around the country that would be technically void. Now, Chief Justice Roberts actually brought up a question that was pretty straightforward, and it didn't really go into the definition of marriage, but he seemed to lean towards this idea that the whole case could be decided just based on sexual discrimination, which is also illegal. His situation was if a woman loves a man and a man loves another man, and you say that the woman can marry the man, but the man can't marry the other man, the only difference in those 2 couples is gender, is sex. So that's the only discriminating factor. How can you prove that to be legal? Now, conservative Justice Anton Scalia came up with the argument of, no one's changed this before, why should we do it? It's been like this for millennia, which is something that Justice Kennedy also brought up. He said that the word that kept coming back to him was millennia. They kept referring to this idea that heterosexual marriage and the definition of marriage has been the same for over a millennia, and why should we feel that we can change it now, being the 9 members of this particular Supreme Court? But again, Justice Ginsburg came out to say, we've changed the definition of marriage time and time again in the Supreme Court. In fact, just as recently as in 1982, there was a law in Louisiana that got struck down dealing with marriage in that state. She also went on to remind people that the gender rules of marriage and the definition of marriage has itself evolved over many, many years. In fact, just in this century, not even a millennia. You don't have to look too far back to see when it was legally wrong for a woman to actually work outside the home, control her own money, or basically do anything that her husband didn't tell her to do. It was only back in the late 1970s that was the first prosecution of a husband raping his own wife. which before that was never prosecuted. So the idea of marriage has already changed. This is not something completely unusual. Now, conservative news outlet National Review Online also said that arguing for gay marriage and deciding in favor of gay marriage would change the social institution of marriage, thereby ruining the fabric that holds it together, taking away that pedestal that marriage is actually held up by the heterosexual community, which has already been widely debunked by the idea that heterosexual couples break up, get divorced all the time. Adding gay married couples to the mix is not suddenly going to make the institution of marriage weaker. In fact, that was another one of the arguments against gay marriage, saying that it somehow is taking rights away from straight couples, which again, the justices came up and said, exactly what rights are being taken away from straight couples? This isn't doing anything to remove rights. This is only giving rights to gay couples. Now, going into the oral arguments on Tuesday, many people feel that in June, the Supreme Court will decide for gay marriage, and it will become legal in all 50 states. They're not really sure exactly how the majority opinion will be written and exactly what laws it will change, but most people feel it will go for gay marriage. Yet, after the oral arguments were actually over, NPR did a small little piece with a person from SCOTUS blog, and they said, well, the court's really deeply divided, and while maybe it will still lean towards pro-gay marriage, it's actually going to be a lot closer than people think, likely meaning a 5-4 vote. But then back over at 538.com, they used their fantasy SCOTUS blog and showed basically they think it's going to go closer to 6-3 or even 7-2 in favor of gay marriage. Now, lastly, being wrapped up in all of this is, of course, the presidential candidates who are going to be running in 2016. A lot of people who didn't want to see this case actually make it to the court were hoping that another president would get in place so that they could replace some of the more liberal people on the court and possibly make it more conservative, possibly meaning gay marriage would not happen. But we can see that time for that escape clause has run out. And for those people who have declared themselves to be running for president in 2016, or the ones who are getting close to declaring, this question has been put before them: would you go to a gay wedding? And it's going down mostly the way you would understand. People on the Democratic side saying, of course, people on the Republican side saying mostly no, but they're dodging around the question. Some saying, I would go to the reception, but not to the wedding. Some would saying, I would go to a wedding, but I've never been invited to one. Some flat out saying they would not go. Now, it's getting really hard for people on the Republican side to be dodging that question because polling is showing that even a majority of Republicans are starting to favor the idea of gay marriage. It falls very much in line with libertarian viewpoint of, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, why should they infringe on your individual liberties? So now the arguing is done in front of the Supreme Court, but that doesn't mean that we can't debate it out here in the public sphere. What do you think the court is going to do? What would you like them to do? And give me some reasons for either side. So thanks for watching another episode of the Motley Stew Show. If you like what you can see, you can go ahead and subscribe right here, or here, or here, or here. You can also like, favorite, and share, and send this out to people you know, people who want to get involved in the discussion. Stay tuned for next week, and as always, here's a little bit of Logan.
Logan, good job.
He's like, I'm done.
What you doing, buddy?
Should we share it? Should we share with them? Yeah, let's have some too. Oh, he's hungry. He's hungry, baby. You want to feed that one too? Oh, how about this guy over here? Here's the other guy. Oh, you gonna share? Oh. You gotta put it, leave it in his mouth. There you go. Oh, he's hungry. How about this one? I think he's hungry. And then when it's empty, you can take it out and put it in the trash can right over there. Thank you. That's probably stuck on your fingers. Can you suck on my fingers?
Oh. Oh, you.
How long does it take to actually change a cultural... So the case before the court is actually called Obergefell versus Obergefell? Obergefell